everybody. Thank you for joining today's webinar around social listening and why traditional pharmaceutical market research is not enough. Today, we'll go through some brief introductions, then we'll go through the presentation, and then we'll do a Q&A at the end. So just real quick, my name is Brian Atkiss. I'm Director of Data and Analytics Solutions at XNET. I've been with XNET for a little over 6 years now, and I've got a lot of experience with unstructured data analytics, looking at social listening data as a huge part of that. Sydney, if you want to introduce yourself.
Yeah, hi, I'm Sydney Search, data analytics and psychology.
Great. So we wanted to start just real quick. We'll do an overview of XNET for the folks that aren't aware. So we've got 4 key solution areas at XNET that we focus on, all around technology and technology consulting. So we have enablement and automation solutions, business application solutions, which could be patient-facing or internal workforce-facing digital applications, digital core, which is the infrastructure, cloud, and hybrid IT solutions that the applications and automation solutions would run on, and data and analytics solutions, which is obviously where we're going to focus on today's webinar and in specific social listening data. Additionally, when we talk about social listening, it's important to understand it's one component of a number of different data sources that can be brought together to understand your patients and being able to deliver, better services to them across different types of channels. So we do have an ability to bring data beyond social data together to understand your patients. And in this webinar, we'll focus specifically on the social listening aspect of patient 360 data. So when we talk about social listening, it's really, as a definition for anyone who's not familiar, it's the practice of listening to and deriving insights from conversations that are happening online with patients, caregivers, healthcare professionals, etc., across a number of social media platforms. And some of the advantages of this type of listening is, and really this type of market research, is it's organic and unbiased. So when people are talking online, they do so really in an unscripted way, and in many times they're not prompted. They're deciding to post their views or opinions on their own. And so because of that, the results are really not subject to the typical response and confirmation bias that other market research methods have, right? And then additionally, the data is uninfluenced and unhampered by a corporate presence, right? People are just posting their opinions, and it's how they feel in the moment. Additionally, another advantage is the collection of data and the ability to analyze the data is lightning fast. So it's captured in real time. It can be gathered, categorized, and analyzed very quickly. And not just the ability to look at all the data as it comes in real time, but also look back at historical data, whether you look back 6 years or 6 months, 1 year, 2 years, etc. You can do all of that in very quickly and turn around an analysis of data within days to weeks and not months. And the client reaction time can then be improved as you can deliver insights much quicker than ever before. Additionally, the data or the conversations are public, and they're a form of word of mouth that exists within the public sphere. So, the data that you're looking at is only publicly available data that is on, posts that are performed on public forums and not private. Additionally, there are people who post, and then there's people who just listen to what is being said by their friends, their colleagues, the general public. And there's been studies done that 9 out of 10 people with a profile on a social media site don't actually post. They're just there to view what other people are saying. So when someone says something, they have a potential audience that is much larger than just what they're saying. And so to not pay attention to this data is potentially, you know, an opportunity that you're missing, and potentially a risk that you're not paying attention to what the data or what the people are saying online. So additionally, when we look at social listening, there's a difference between social monitoring and social listening. Social monitoring, which is what many organizations do, is looking at your controlled mentions. So controlled mentions would be posts that patients or caregivers are posting on your own channel. So they would be posting at your Twitter handle or on a Facebook page for your brand. And that allows you to manage those very easily. However, there's a much broader sphere out on the public social media sites that is happening that you wouldn't be paying attention to if you're only doing social monitoring. Social listening is the ability to capture not just those controlled mentions, but also the brand mentions, which could include the controlled mentions of your own channels, but also general mentions of your brand anywhere, even forums that you do not own, that you cannot control. Additionally, there's competitor mentions. So being able to not just look at your brand, your drugs, your company's mentions, but looking at competitors and what patients are saying about a competitor medication or treatment. When do they compare your brand or your drug to a competitor's, and how are your competitors' direct-to-consumer marketing efforts resonating with patients, to potentially get valuable insights around that. And then beyond even competitor mentions, there's just the general industry and therapeutic area mentions. So for a given treatment, what are the general discussions around just the symptoms of the disease that it's being treated for, and the experience and the patient journey that a patient goes through as they get diagnosed, as they discover treatments and compare treatments, etc. And so it's very important to understand the overall therapeutic area and even just general pharmaceutical industry trends, and how patients are looking at the industry in general. So again, it's very important to understand that you need to look at the broader sphere of social listening beyond just the social monitoring. With that said, we're going to take a break here to just do a quick poll around what type of social listening are you currently doing. So please select one of the options. It could be yes, you're listening to your brands, competitors, and therapeutic areas. Yes, but you're only listening to social monitoring of your controlled mentions. No, you're not really doing any, but you do have an initiative on your roadmap, or no, you have no current plans. So we'll wait a second to get the results, and then we'll summarize them and then move on through the rest of the presentation. Okay, so we got the results, and it looks like of the responses, there's a bit of a mix, but the #1 response is that yes, you are listening to your brand's competitors in therapeutic areas, which is great, and that's definitely what we like to see for our clients. Is it's important to get that broad understanding. So now we will move on to the next slide, and Sydney will start to discuss the sources of data and the types of reporting and examples that can be done with social listening.
Thanks, Brian. So diving right in, these are a couple of data sources that are commonly gathered for social listening solutions that Brian's been talking about. So first is social networking. These are sources that brands are probably already monitoring. These are the owned channels where brands are pushing content and engaging with patients. Media sharing, these platforms are great at engaging patients. They represent an excellent opportunity to gather user-generated content. That's becoming really popular for brands to share right now. These are also places where complaints about products and experiences are often posted and can go unnoticed if they're not being looked at. So a potentially viral video on TikTok about side effects, or even something positive bringing awareness to an unknown treatment area. Blogging and community building. Posts on these platforms often go more in depth about a patient's experience, partly because these platforms offer more opportunity for anonymity. So patients feel more open to ask direct and sometimes uncomfortable questions on forums like Reddit, and this has a number of sub-forums dedicated to specific treatment areas, with patients seeking and offering support to each other. Also, verified healthcare providers can participate and provide guidance on interpreting test results and potential treatment plans. And then finally, integrated data. So something we're uniquely suited to do is incorporate proprietary data from client teams. These data sources can be consumer support center data, survey data, focus group data, and these can be analyzed on their own or can be layered with social data to provide a holistic understanding of your strategic objectives. So our deliverables can take many forms, but the most popular report cadences are usually monthly, quarterly, or weekly decks. We can review these reports with brand teams and we can customize them to meet your needs, but they're usually comprised of metrics tracking, conversation topics, demographic information, as well as sentiment analysis. Additionally, we can do deep dive reports that look at a much larger data set, typically between 6 months and 2 years. Similarly, these are highly customizable and focus on answering serious business questions proposed by client teams who want to understand the motivations of patient behavior and attitudes, their unmet needs, DTC campaign efficacy, competitor analysis, and influencer behavior. So these are a couple of case studies we've prepared that highlight some of the greatest hits we have here at XNET. So identifying gaps in the market or unmet needs of patients, caregivers, and or healthcare providers is a basic but critical. So our analysts identified sources where bipolar patients were discussing their treatment routines and performed an analysis of the posts. And we discovered that patients on anonymous forums were more likely to disclose non-adherence online than in patient surveys or directly with their providers. Patients reported their desire to drink alcohol impacted their treatment routine, so they simply skipped doses when they wanted to drink. And with this information, our client was able to adapt healthcare provider and DTC messaging towards patients about alcohol use with the drug to better inform them of the risks, as well as informing healthcare providers about the behavior itself so they could better partner with their patients. So as we know, DTC campaigns are both expensive and highly visible representations of a given brand. So it's imperative to ensure that messaging is effective with and reflective of patients it's meant to communicate with. A few years ago, a pharma client was launching a new allergy treatment and sought to understand patient conversations about allergies so they could optimize their marketing materials. So our analysts queried allergy conversations across multiple platforms, focusing on the language that was used by the allergy sufferers. We identified trends in the language that indicated that patients essentially felt at war with their allergies. They used terms like under attack and destroy or pollen bomb. And this enabled our client to craft DTC messaging that would better resonate with the target audience. So savvy brand teams always have an eye on their competitors, but social listening can give a unique insight into patient behavior, specifically when it comes to brand loyalty and switching behaviors. For example, a rheumatoid arthritis team became aware that patients were seeking other options for treatment and switching away from their drug, but they didn't have data on the reasoning behind the switches. So XNET looked at online and performed an analysis of RA patients discussing our client's drug versus their competitor products. Comments were coded for sentiment. In addition, they were coded for topics that drove both adoption and rejection of the drug. We learned that patients choosing competitor products were often drawn to the support team offered by the competitor's consumer advocacy group that included both financial and educational support. So with this information, our client was able to bring this to their internal teams and strategize on developing their own program. And finally, we know investigating patient attitudes is an excellent use of social data, particularly when the clear reasons for those attitudes aren't readily available through standard channels like patient to provider conversations, focus groups, or surveys. So in this example, a dermatology brand was curious about patient hesitation towards incorporating biologics into their treatment regimen, and whether there were gaps in patient knowledge about biologics. So our analysts sorted patient questions into several categories about biologics, treatment administration, side effects, and treatment access. We found that the top themes generated by patients themselves were primarily about becoming immunocompromised as a result of biologic use. Additionally, there were concerns about side effects as well as potential treatment options after using biologics, particularly if the biologics failed. As a result of this analysis, our client realized the need for more comprehensive education about biologics, both for patients as well as their providers.
Okay, and thank you, Sydney, for going through those case studies. We're going to pause for another poll question here. Of those 4 use cases that were described in those case studies, which resonate with you the most? Is it discovering unmet patient needs, updating DTC messaging, comparison to competitor brands, or even deep insights into brand-specific questions in that example for the biologics? So again, we'll pause for a couple seconds here if you fill out the poll question, and then we'll summarize the results. Okay, it looks like the results are coming in. So we've got actually pretty clear results here. The #1 use case was discovering unmet patient needs, which is great. And so we'll move on to the next slide. But what's important to understand is these are 4 potential use cases for using this data, but there's more than just this, and that's actually where we're going to go next. Is just highlight a handful of others. It's really the number of ways you can apply this data and the analysis of this data is pretty broad, right? So you can do a lot with social listening data and understanding what patients are saying to analyze that data and come up with insights that help your brand. So in addition to the ones we described, there's the ability to potentially discover gaps in the market. We've had clients that wanted to monitor discussions around an annual conference related to a therapeutic area that for their brand. We also, one of the other big use cases that we see is being able to identify and analyze brand advocates or partners and influencers within the online space. So it's really great to be able to leverage that data to look for those advocates that already exist and they're already talking online, and being able to leverage that information to either develop new partnerships or even just be aware of what's out there, and how that potentially could impact your patients. So that's just a handful of others that obviously there's a lot you can do with this data. So with that said, that sort of wraps up the end of our presentation. We will pause for a second here for any questions and check to see if we had any questions come in as we went through. So feel free to type any questions into the chat box if you have them. Right, so actually looks like we did get a few questions already. So one question, if you wanted to implement social listening, how would you get started? And that's a great question. I know some of the folks here already have some, but in a few of the responses we got, there were some that didn't have any social listening or was on their roadmap. The best way to get started is really do some initial discovery of your brands, your company name. Look at the data that's out there, what sites and what social media networks are their conversations occurring on. Look at some of the competitors and then start to evaluate what does exist and what can be done from there. And we are offering a complimentary analysis actually for our clients to do an initial just understanding of what's out there for anyone that attends this webinar. So if we'll be following up with everyone and we can help you really get started to understand what is out there. So looking at another question, what type of information can be gathered around influential users? That's a really great question. Sydney, I think I'll let you take that one if you don't mind.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm really glad that we got this question. We do this a lot, and it's hugely valuable to our clients. So the information that we provide really depends on what the client wants from the analysis and what kinds of influencers we're analyzing. So we define influencers in a couple of ways. The first is anyone that a brand team partners with who produces sponsored posts that live on their profiles. That's pretty common these days. Sometimes those partnerships will extend to DTC campaigns. So we've all seen the ads on TV. With these users, we generally report an analysis of the performance of their posts and any mentions of the DTC appearances. So we frequently note consumer and patient opinions about these ads. And then the other type of influencer is anyone that could be considered a big voice within a given group. Many of our clients just want to know what the loudest voices are and what they're saying, and how big their megaphone really is. But outcomes from this sort of analysis are often used to manage existing influencer and partner relationships, but it's also not unusual for brands to consider recruiting organic influencers to become brand ambassadors from these.
Great, thank you, Sydney. And it looks like we did get one more question. Can social listening be used to analyze different users beyond just patients? Sydney, I guess I'll let you take that one as well.
Yeah, surely. We can absolutely analyze other types of users. Frequently, we analyze caregivers, healthcare providers, influencers, financial users, organizations, the list can go on. But we also break these categories down further into subcategories of users. So, for example, patients in different phases of the treatment journey, those who just got diagnosed versus those who've been in treatment for a couple of years. We can also look at different patient personas. So going back to the allergy example, for the UK use case that I went over a couple of slides ago, we might categorize patients by preppers or those to take tissues with them everywhere they go. They medicate before they step outside. Or another category, people that just suffer through their allergies and don't take anything, or those who just don't go outside at all because they're avoiding influential healthcare providers and what treatments they're pushing online. Or we can look at healthcare providers that are patients themselves. So for HCPs that both treat and suffer from a particular condition, what treatments do they personally use and what treatments do they prescribe to their patients?
Yeah, and I think that's a great point. Is just it's not limited to patients. Obviously, that's what initially, you might focus on at first, but for some conditions, even take for example Alzheimer's or other conditions that affect a population that may not be active online, but that requires a lot of caregivers to take care of the individual. It's those caregiver conversations which really give you insight into the disease and how it's impacting the patients. And they do share online because they're looking for support from others that are providing that same care. So there's a lot of different ways to apply this data and get insights out of it. So, and with that, that's the end of the questions that we have. So we wanted to thank everyone for joining us on today's webinar. As far as next steps, we will be following up with all the attendees. If you're interested in exploring how social listening can apply to your company, we can set up a meeting to discuss further. And as I mentioned before, we will provide a complimentary analysis for anyone that is looking for it, who wants to set up a follow-up meeting. So please look out for that from our representatives of XNET, and we'd be happy to have this follow-up conversation. So again, thank you all for joining, and I hope you have a wonderful day.